Hello, welcome back to the channel where I have the brand spanking new Lotus Emira, which is getting quite a lot of attention. I think it's very exciting. They've sold loads in advance, but exactly how good is it? Well, let's find out. I've got a Porsche Cayman GTS to compare it against. So we'll have a look inside both because Lotus says they've done loads of work inside this car as well as under the skin and outside and everything else. Then we'll go for a drive on a brilliant road and decide which is the best sports car. So this is the new Emira, the last petrol-powered car Lotus will make. It has a new chassis, although it's still extruded aluminium like the Evora and the Elise and Exige before it. Like the Evora, it has a 3.5 litre supercharged V6 in its middle, making 400 horsepower here. This one is a 6-speed manual with a limited slip differential because it has a driver's pack. Now that means it costs nearly £80,000, will do 0 to 62 miles an hour in 4.3 seconds and go on to 180 miles an hour. And this is the Porsche 718 Cayman GTS, and it gets a 4 litre naturally aspirated flat 6 with all the revs, so it makes 394 horsepower, and through its 6-speed manual gearbox it all but matches the Emira for speed, and also for weight actually. The Porsche is 1,405 kilos, the Lotus another 35 kilos on top of that. The Porsche costs 65 grand before options, but by the time you've added some of those, these two-seat mid-engine Sportsters are as close a pair of rivals as you'll find. Right, the first thing to note is that Lotus says this is an early pre-production car, TT, tooling tryout car, so please, they said, overlook some of the interior foibles, like the quality of the leather and the stitching and things like that. I don't think they've got a lot to worry about. This is a nice feeling interior, so much nicer than Lotus's past, like the Evora. When you sit in, I think the pedals are still ever so slightly offset, but not horrendously. The drive position is fairly straight, the instruments are digital, and there is a touch screen. This is one of the things they say they're still working on, which is brightening some of the fonts and changing some of the fonts, because they can be a tiny bit hard to read, but by and large it's pretty functional, and hey, there's not that much to play with to get wrong. If you want to change a drive mode, that's on a physical button. It doesn't change the dampers, just changes the powertrain, exhaust and stability system, and then the HVAC controls are physical gear lever. I've got stowage for an entire bottle of water down there, 2 cup holders, stuff in here, there's a boot at the back and even a big shelf behind the seats. This is a really practical, pleasant, plush interior. I like it very much. Right, so welcome to the inside of the Cayman, which is very nice. Dead straight driving position with a very round steering wheel and a gear lever in the right place. It's a great place to sort of functional interior to do driving from. This one's quite austere, it's quite dark, it's quite straightforward, which is not uncommon, but you can have a brighter colour, but it's not as flamboyant as the Lotus, I don't think, in any form. I've got quite a lot of buttons, which is nice. I like buttons. Porsche has moved away from them in its very latest generation cars and has gone for a bigger touch screen with some haptic stuff. I prefer the physical button, so I'm hoping that when the next Cayman comes along, maybe Volkswagen Group and Porsche will start to back away from all the touchscreen stuff. But generally, it's a really functional, sensible interior that would be good to do driving from. I've got a rev counter right where it should be in the middle and a speedo sensibly next to it. It's also quite practical. There's a little boot in the front, there's one at the back, and there's space above the engine bay. The Lotus has got that sort of shelf behind the seats, which you could probably get a set of golf clubs in if that's your thing, but I think this is probably the more practical car. But let's have a drive in the Lotus, then have a drive in this, and see which is nicer on the road. So this is the Emira on the move. I'm in its most chilled setting, which is called Tour. I'll pull it through into Sport and you get a little bit more wooffle you might hear from the exhaust. Right, first impressions. Drive position's still pretty good. I'm not a massive fan of a sort of squared off wheel, but you can see out, you can see the wing tops that give you an idea of how to place the car. So it doesn't feel over wide, very easy to place. It's still got hydraulically assisted power steering, which is sort of weighty by modern standards, especially around parking speeds. It's just sort of 2.8 turns lock to lock. Makes a little woofle, doesn't it? Quite a nice little rump. Pedal works are okay. This car has got a sort of flat, dead bit of travel in the brake, before it starts to do anything. It's a good sort of inch before it does something. I've spoken to a colleague who's had one and his did the same. I've spoken to another colleague who said the car he was in, which is a different car, again, wasn't such a problem. But in this, it's a bit of a problem because it means the brake goes sufficiently low that you then can't quite heel and toe it very easy because you've lost the brake pedal. You've got to hoik your foot back round to get to it. Gear shift has never been a strong point on anything from the Elise onwards, really, even through the Exige and Evora. Still not the world's greatest. I think it's improved again. It's got a sort of hesitation and then it drops in quite nicely, and then it's, the weighting is there, but there's a little bit of sort of stiction to it and a sort of little graveliness that you just could do without. It'd be nice if it was more snicky and smooth. I'd take a longer throw if it sort of fell into gear a bit easier, but it doesn't feel like it's always working with you. And all those things are a little bit sort of familiar Lotus-y in a way. What's also familiar is the way this car rides. For a sports car, it sort of breathes and it flows, and you see a lump coming and you think, oh, that's a big lump, and then it just doesn't translate to a big input in the interior. There's a really, really nice flow to it in this Tour suspension setting. I haven't driven the one on the firmer suspension setup as yet. I'm told it's much better on track, and then you can also get Michelin Pilot Sport Cup tyres on that as well, which help get the best out of that chassis. Lotus doesn't recommend that you do too many laps on these Goodyear Eagles because it says you just wear them out on track really quickly. And the steering is really, really nice. It's got a sort of calmness around straight ahead, and just as you turn it picks stuff up. It doesn't kick back too much. I think it maybe kicks back, I don't know, maybe does it kick back more than an Evora? I can't be sure. It's been a while since I drove one, but the weighting is nice. The sort of build up of torque that you lean against as you begin to turn is nice, and this car changes direction and flows very, very nicely. There's a little fidget to it on this road. It's not the world's greatest road surface, but it's not the world's worst by any means. I'm not sure you'd want anything too much stiffer than this, but it feels about right. Just picks up a little bit of roll as it goes through corners, but there's just a really pleasant Lotus-ish feel to it, and it just keeps that composure. You hit a mid-corner bump there and the suspension just takes it in and goes, yeah, that's fine. You don't get kicked back through the steering, you don't get kicked offline. It's just a very, very capable, engaging, rewarding sports car with an engine in the right place that makes the right noise. It goes quickly. There is the argument that a Lotus should make the lightest car in its particular class, and if you count the Alpine A110 as being in this car's class, maybe you do. This isn't. This is, for its class, a reasonably heavy car. My counter argument would be that while I agree the best weight for a Lotus is one at which it sells, and the fact that this is more habitable than Lotus is past, and people want it because they can get in it and drive it more easily, well, I think you'd cope with a few extra kilos here and there if that's the answer. But anyway, enough of this. I'll jump in the Porsche and do similar stuff and find out exactly what that is like over what is a very sort of lumpy, pockmarked, quite a challenging road. So this is the Cayman, which straight away, I've done 50 yards in it, straight away feels a quieter car overall. Drive position is great, steering wheel is round, gear shift is lighter and comes through and just falls into gear with less stiction and more ease. And the pedals are really nicely set up, got a really nice firm brake pedal, dodel for heel and towing. Engine sounds really nice. Engine in the Lotus sounds really nice as well. I think you get more induction noise in this, and you probably get more exhaust noise, I think, in in the Lotus. Again, like the Lotus, the steering is uncorrupted. This is electrically assisted rather than pure hydraulic. There's no kickback. I'm just sort of going over into a bend now, and there's some bumps and stuff, and you don't get any sort of kickback through it. I think maybe you could argue it's a little bit. I think it's a little bit lighter, and you might argue there's a little bit less road feel to it, but it's very free of any kickback at all. Again, I can see. I'll struggle to see there's sort of raised wheel arches which you can just sort of use to place the car. I can't see the one on the left quite as easily as the one on the right, so it's not as easy to place that side of the car. And in terms of ride quality and comfort, so I think I can stiffen up the dampers by pushing that, and I don't think on a road like this I'll necessarily want to. That reduces the size of the vertical movements, but it makes them a bit more severe. Actually, it's nice either way. I'll put them back into the softer mode, and then they breathe. It just flows a little bit more easily. Has got a really nice, delicate flow to it, this car. It may not be quite as supple at just the top of the travel as the Lotus. Yeah, just as I came through a couple of compressions there, it just sort of had a bit more harshness, would be overstating it by quite a long way, but it just sort of settled into those bumps with a bit more abruptness, and I think the Lotus has a little bit more suppleness in its wheel travel, which, going on Lotus form, is not unexpected. With everything else thrown in though, because we're talking sort of tenths of degrees of difference in that, and again, it's just as it comes over some of these, I was going to say it's not enough to make a huge difference in terms of which one you'd rather drive along a road like this, but just as I was saying it, whenever a couple of sort of surface changes, surface imperfections and little ridges on the road, and it is a bit more harsh. It's not actually harsh, it's just more harsh than the Lotus. But in isolation, this is really good, and there are, real genuine differences between the two that make it not the easiest thing to call. I prefer the driving position in here. I like a round steering wheel. The gear shift is much better. The engines are different. I do like the response and the noise of this. And all right, it gets better the further round the rev range you go, because it's naturally aspirated, and you really do. You're at the speed limit by the time you're out of second, really. And I think the Lotus is a bit more urgent, a bit more often, because it's a bigger. No, it's not bigger, is it? Because it's a blown unit. The steering is, I think, less corrupted in here, but you get a bit more back in terms of road feel from the hydraulic system in the Lotus. Both of them turn really nicely with a real ease and mid-engine precision. So I mean, in summary, they're both really good at pretty much everything. And what they do is they balance aspects against each other where they have an advantage and a disadvantage. I think even when it comes to the steering, you can play bits off against each other. The Lotus probably has a bit more road feel, but it also gets a little bit more corruption. This has a really nice, easy take up off of straight ahead, which you might prefer to the slightly weightier sort of hydraulic system in the Lotus. It swings and roundabouts all the way through. I think overall I would prefer to spend more time in this car, but there are days and there are times and there are roads when you'd have the Emira every time, and it's a tough one to call. What I'm pleased about is the fact that Lotus makes a car that is as habitable, is as broad between the passengers and is as easy to get into and is as ergonomically sensibly laid out as the Emira is. And even if it can't quite compete in all areas with a Cayman, you look at a Lotus you can finally sensibly buy and say, yeah, this is a good everyday sports car, and that is something to be celebrated. So thank you for joining me. We're here on the YouTube every week pretty much. And if it's not a first drive or a twin test, then it's a preview or a track battle or a drag race or a motor show. I don't know when we last had one of those, but you know, they still happen. So if you love it if you subscribe, I'd love it if you like this video, and if you click the bell icon, you'll never miss one. Thanks very much for joining me, appreciate it more than you know, and I'll see you next time.